Code black, incoming. Clear the way. Vitals are unstable. Keep pushing. Get him to trauma 3. Prep the defib. Starting compressions now. He's coding. Monitor's unstable. Clear.
The documents are finalized. I've secured everything. Good. Let's proceed as planned. Ensure no one sees them.
Does he have anyone who truly loves him?
Don't worry. You're gonna be okay. He's stable.
He's stable. Look at the monitor.
Oh my God, it's a miracle.
20 years, to the beginning of it all, Richard Williams was, by every outward measure, a man who had everything. He was sharp, ambitious, and relentless, the kind of man who built an empire out of nothing but sheer will. But underneath the tailored suits and boardroom confidence, there was a softer version of him, one that only his wife Emma ever truly saw. Emma was warm where Richard was calculated, patient where he was driven. Their love had been simple in the beginning. Late nights talking about the future, early mornings filled with quiet laughter. When Emma became pregnant, Richard's entire world seemed to shift. He spoke of his unborn daughter constantly. He painted a nursery himself, even though he could have hired a dozen people to do it. He dreamed, out loud and often, of a little girl who would inherit his ambition and her mother's gentle heart. The day she was born, the hospital room was filled with quiet joy. Richard held his daughter for the first time, tears in his eyes, whispering promises only a newborn could hear. Then the doctor returned, his expression carefully composed in the way doctors are trained to deliver difficult news. "Mr. Williams, I need to speak with you about your daughter's eyes." The test confirmed it. Complete blindness. A rare condition, present from birth, with no cure available at the time. The room, once filled with warmth, went silent. Richard's smile did not fade slowly. It vanished all at once, like a light switch flipped in the dark. In the weeks that followed, the pressure began. Richard's parents, proud, image-obsessed people who had built their own fortune on reputation, pulled him aside more than once. "A blind daughter will destroy everything we've built," his father said flatly. "Do you understand what people will say?" His business partners were no gentler. In quiet conversations over expensive dinners, they reminded him that investors valued strength, image, legacy. A family with a disabled heir doesn't inspire confidence. One of them said, swirling wine in his glass as though the words cost him nothing. Slowly, Richard began to change. He came home later. He spoke less. He avoided holding his daughter, as if touching her might make the truth more real. Emma noticed it all, the distance growing wider every day, the warmth draining out of the man she loved. "She's still our daughter, Richard," Emma pleaded one night, tears in her eyes. "She's not broken. She's perfect. Please don't do this to her. Don't do this to us." But fear and pride are a dangerous combination in a man unwilling to be seen as weak. One rainy night, much like the storm that would rage 20 years later outside that same hospital, Richard packed a single suitcase. He left a modest sum of money on the kitchen table, not out of love, but out of guilt, and signed divorce papers that had been sitting untouched for weeks. He walked out the door without looking back. Behind him, Emma sat alone in a house that suddenly felt too large and too quiet, holding a baby girl who would grow up never knowing her father's face. Life without Richard was hard in ways money could never have prepared Emma for. She worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, cleaning offices before dawn and waiting tables late into the night. There were months she skipped meals so her daughter wouldn't have to. There were nights she cried silently after tucking her little girl into bed, careful never to let her hear. But amid all that hardship, something remarkable was happening. Her daughter, whom Emma named Lily, was growing into someone extraordinary. Blind since birth, Lily never knew the world the way others did, yet she seemed to understand people more deeply than anyone around her. She learned Braille quickly, devouring books with her fingertips. She learned to navigate the world through sound, memory, and an uncanny sense for kindness. Other children were sometimes cruel, the way children can be when they don't understand difference. They mocked her cane, whispered when she passed, excluded her from games. Lily never responded with bitterness. Instead, she smiled through it, comforted the crying instead of comforting herself, and somehow always found something good to say. "Never hate your father," Emma told her once, brushing her daughter's hair as they sat by the window. "Bitterness only makes the darkness darker. You already carry enough darkness, sweetheart. Don't let hate add to it." Lily took those words and made them part of who she was. As she grew older, she began volunteering at the local hospital, sitting with patients who had no visitors, holding the hands of the dying, singing softly to newborns in the nursery. She couldn't see their faces, but she could hear their pain, and that was enough for her to want to ease it. Then, when Lily was 19, Emma grew sick. The years of exhaustion and sacrifice had worn her body down long before her time. Lily sat by her mother's hospital bed every single day, just as she now sat with strangers, holding her hand, whispering that everything would be okay. But this time it wasn't. Emma passed away quietly one evening, her final words a soft reminder to her daughter. "Keep your heart soft, Lily. No matter what life brings you." Lily was alone in the world, and yet, somehow, she did not grow cold. If anything, she poured herself even more into helping others, as though her mother's kindness had transferred fully into her. While Lily grew up in near poverty, Richard's fortune multiplied beyond anything he could have imagined. He built one company, then another, then an empire that spanned industries: real estate, technology, shipping. Magazines put him on their covers. Business schools studied his rise. He owned private jets, sprawling estates, more wealth than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. But wealth, it turned out, was a poor substitute for the things he had left behind. He remarried a few years after leaving Emma, a woman named Sandra, elegant and sharp-tongued, who loved the idea of being married to power far more than she loved Richard himself. Their son, Daniel, grew up surrounded by luxury and entitlement, learning early that love in their household was measured in inheritance shares rather than affection. Richard's mansion was enormous, filled with expensive art and imported furniture, and yet it always felt empty. Dinners were silent, transactional. Conversations with Sandra revolved around spending, status, appearances. Daniel rarely looked up from his phone long enough to speak to his father at all. At night, alone in his enormous bedroom, Richard sometimes thought of Emma, of the daughter he had never really known. He told himself it was too late to go back, that the life he'd built left no room for regret. But regret has a way of settling into a person's chest and staying there, quietly, for years. Then his heart began to fail. The diagnosis came without warning: a severe cardiac condition, worsened by years of stress and neglect. Doctors urged him to slow down, to rest, to prepare for surgery. Richard, stubborn as ever, ignored most of their advice and kept working, kept pushing, as though sheer will alone could keep his heart beating the way it always had. Around him, his family reacted in the only way they knew how. Behind closed doors, Sandra and Daniel began quietly discussing what would happen to the company, the estate, the fortune, should Richard's condition worsen. No one asked how he was feeling. No one sat by his bedside just to hold his hand. He was, despite everything he owned, the loneliest man in the city. It was on one of the worst nights of his illness that fate finally intervened. A storm rolled in over the city, thunder rattling windows, rain pounding the streets. Richard collapsed at his estate, his heart finally giving out under the weight of years he had spent building walls instead of relationships. He was rushed to St. Augustine's Hospital, the very same hospital where, 20 years earlier, his daughter had been born blind, and where, unknown to him, that same daughter now spent her evenings volunteering, offering comfort to strangers who had no one else. As doctors fought to stabilize him, Lily was assigned, quite by chance, to sit with new patients in the cardiac wing, offering conversation and comfort during the long, frightening hours of recovery. She had no idea whose room she was about to walk into. She heard him before she reached his door, the shallow breathing, the quiet, involuntary sounds of someone in pain and utterly alone. She knocked softly, then entered without waiting for a response, guided by the sound of his breath and the faint beeping of machines. "You don't have to be scared," she said gently, finding a chair beside his bed. I know hospitals can feel cold and lonely, but you're not alone right now. I'm here. Richard, weak and disoriented, turned his head slightly toward the sound of her voice. There was something about it, something achingly familiar, though he couldn't place why. Who are you? He managed to ask. My name is Lily, she said with a small smile. I volunteer here. I like to sit with people who don't have anyone else in the room. Over the following days, as Richard slowly regained his strength, Lily returned again and again. She read to him. She told him small, gentle stories about her days, her thoughts, the sounds of the city she couldn't see but had learned to love through hearing alone. Richard, who had spent decades surrounded by people who wanted something from him, found himself genuinely looking forward to her visits, the first honest connection he'd had in years. Your voice, he told her one afternoon, his tone almost wistful. It feels strangely familiar. Like I've heard it somewhere before a long time ago. Lily laughed softly. Maybe we've met in another life, she said. Neither of them knew how close to the truth those words really were. As Richard's health slowly stabilized, something else was happening behind the scenes, something that would soon unravel 20 years of buried history. An elderly nurse named Olivia Brooks, who had worked at St. Augustine's for over 3 decades, happened to catch a glimpse of Lily's wrist one afternoon while helping her prepare a patient's chart. There, faint but unmistakable, was a small crescent-shaped birthmark. Olivia froze. She had seen that exact birthmark once before, decades earlier, on a newborn baby girl she had personally helped deliver, a baby born to a young couple named Richard and Emma Williams. Her hands trembling slightly, Olivia pulled old hospital records from storage, records that hadn't been touched in 20 years. She cross-referenced names, dates, birth details. Everything matched. Later that evening, she requested a private DNA test be run, discreetly, using samples already on file from Richard's recent treatment and a simple swab from Lily, framed as a routine hospital procedure. When the results came back, Olivia sat alone in the nurse's station for a long time, staring at the paper in her hands, unsure how, or whether, to tell either of them. But some truths refused to stay hidden forever. Olivia requested a private meeting with Richard the following morning. She sat beside his bed, her expression heavy with the weight of what she was about to say. Mr. Williams, she began carefully, 20 years ago, I helped deliver your daughter. I remember her clearly, a birthmark on her wrist, shaped like a small crescent moon. Richard's expression shifted, confusion turning slowly into dread. Why are you telling me this now? Olivia took a steadying breath. Because the young woman who has been sitting with you every day, the volunteer named Lily, she has that exact same birthmark. I ran the records. I confirmed it. Mr. Williams, Lily is your daughter. For a long moment, Richard said nothing at all. The machines beside him beeped steadily, indifferent to the way his entire world had just tilted on its axis. His breathing grew heavy, uneven, his eyes filling with tears he hadn't allowed himself in 20 years. No, he whispered. That's not possible. She can't be. But somewhere deep inside him, he already knew. The familiar voice, the gentle warmth, the way she had walked into his room the very first night without hesitation, as though something greater than coincidence had guided her there. When Lily arrived for her usual visit that afternoon, she immediately sensed something different in the room. The air felt heavier. Richard's breathing was unsteady, not from his illness this time, but from something else entirely. Richard, are you all right? She asked, reaching for his hand out of habit. He didn't let go this time. Instead, he held on tightly, his voice breaking as he finally spoke the words he had avoided for 2 decades. Lily, 20 years ago, I had a daughter. A beautiful baby girl, born blind. And I was too afraid, too weak, too consumed by pride to be the father she deserved. I left her. I left her mother. I walked away and I never looked back, no matter how many nights I told myself I would. Lily went very still, her fingers tightening slightly around his. The nurse confirmed it today, Richard continued, his voice trembling. The birthmark on your wrist, it's the same one I saw the day you were born. Lily, I'm your father. Silence swallowed the room. Lily sat frozen, processing 20 years of unanswered questions collapsing into a single, impossible moment. The father she had never known. The man whose absence had shaped so much of her childhood. The stranger whose life she had just spent the last several weeks helping to save, without ever knowing his name meant anything to her at all. Richard, weak and trembling, slowly lowered himself from the bed, kneeling on the cold hospital floor despite the protest of his still recovering heart. Tears streamed freely down his face as he looked up toward the daughter he had spent 2 decades avoiding. "Please," he whispered, "can you ever forgive me?" The room held its breath. Lily sat quietly for a long moment, her unseeing eyes somehow finding his anyway, as though 20 years of longing had finally found its way home. Slowly, a small, gentle smile spread across her face. "I forgave you," she said softly, "long before I even knew who you were." Richard broke down completely, sobbing into his daughter's hands as she knelt beside him, pulling him into an embrace neither of them had known they needed for 20 long years. It wasn't anger that filled the room in that moment. It wasn't resentment or blame. It was relief. It was healing. It was love, finally allowed to exist after 2 decades of silence. "I spent my whole life wishing my father would love me," Lily whispered against his shoulder. "I never imagined I'd meet him like this. But I'm glad it happened. I'm glad I got the chance to know you even now." In the weeks that followed, Richard began to change in ways money never could have bought. He stepped back from the relentless pace of his business empire. He spent his days, instead, getting to know the daughter he had missed for 20 years, learning her favorite songs, her small habits, the sound of her laughter when something genuinely delighted her. He used a significant portion of his fortune to establish a foundation dedicated to children's eye health, funding research, surgeries, and support programs for blind and visually impaired children across the country. He named it, fittingly, in honor of the daughter who had taught him more about love in a few short weeks than his wealth had taught him in 20 years. Sandra and Daniel, more concerned with inheritance than reconciliation, eventually drifted from his life entirely, a quiet consequence of relationships built on convenience rather than love. Richard let them go without bitterness. He had learned, at long last, what truly mattered. Lily never regained her sight, but for the first time in her life, she had something she had never had before, a father who chose, finally, to stay. Sometimes, the people we throw away become the very ones sent to save us. Wealth can buy almost anything in this world, but it can never, ever buy back lost time. If this story touched your heart, don't scroll away just yet. Hit that like button, and if you haven't already, subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment and let us know what part moved you the most. More stories like this are coming soon, so stay close, because the next one might just be the one that changes how you see